going to give some selected readings from this book that I wrote. Would you guess that it's full of 14-line poems? It's called 100 Artisanal Tonal Poems. In other words, they're experiments in beauty of sound. They're called, also in the subtitle, Slimmed Down 14ers. I thought 14er might attract more readers than sonnet, which sounds too much like what you were forced to learn in high school. 4-beat lines and tight, sweet harmonies. The harmonies are tighter and sweeter because the lines are shorter. 4 beats rather than the 5 that Shakespeare used. Shakespeare, you may remember, shall I compare thee to a summer's day? And 1 and 2 and 3 and 4 and 5. Mine have 4. This means the tempo is speeded up by 20%, and the rhymes come sooner because they come sooner, and there are quite a lot of them, and also the verbal and the verbal harmonies in both vowels and consonants are quite abundant. You get a tighter harmony, and I like the idea that the concision, putting things in a small space, if emotionally powerful, will produce a little explosion in the mind. That happens to me, and I'd like to try to share it. I'm an experimenter in verse form, and I carry this rather far. In these poems throughout the book, I have 4-beat lined sonnets, but I tried seeing how much you can slim down the sonnet line. What would be the ultimate? I posed that as an experimental problem, and I decided that the shortest sonnet I could write would have 3 syllables per line. La la la, and then it stops. That actually is a metric foot or a rhythm structure unit that was used by the ancient Greeks. They called it an amphimeter. So here is a poem, actually a sequence of 3 very short poems, which are over in a minute because the lines are so short, which I call diet sonnets, because the theme of these form changes is slimming down, getting rid of all the flab in your poetic writing for maximum concision and targeted force. Okay, diet sonnets, and these are in a meter you probably will never hear again, the amphimacrian manometer, meaning 1 amphimeter per line. Feel obese? Thinner verse can disperse calories. Ready? Right? Something new. Good for you. Sonnet light, L-I-T-E. Lacking vim? Exercise, thinner thighs, sonnet slim, slender eyes, sonnet wise. Sonnet's over, you see. Part 2. Fat must go, shed those pounds, slimmer sounds. Help, you know. Something wrong? Deltoid, ab, fight the flab, sonnet strong. Surfer scene, suit too small, simply call sonnet lean. Slim is your sonnet cure. Part 3. Fat, don't fret. Waist too thick? Simply click son.net. You will thank thinner lines. Healthy signs, sonnet lank. Think of it. Soon you'll be thoroughly sonnet fit. Thin is cool. Sonnets rule. Okay, enough of silly stuff. That was a lot of fun. So let's start with one of the 4-beat things that I promised. The book is done in a somewhat experimental way to make poetry reading a little easier and more comfortable for everyone, because I recognize that reading books of poetry is not a customary activity for Americans. We don't do a whole lot of it. So I have to encourage people and get them accustomed, so to speak, eased into the poetry world with a little bit of prose assistance. So, every poem is preceded by thoughts. That is a flash essay, a blog. Sometimes in my other books I've called it blogatelle. That's a hybrid of blog and bagatelle. Comes from the French for a musical trifle. Beethoven wrote them, Bartók wrote them. Here are thoughts on my sonnet, Shakespeare. I'm a time traveler. Even my close acquaintances don't know this, but you I'll tell. I was best friends with Will back at Stratford High in the late 70s of the 16th century. We wrote sonnets to each other while the slower boys construed their Latin. If you love Shakespeare, wouldn't it be a dream come true to speak with him personally? I did that in my book Shakespeare, published in 2015, where I wrote replies to his 154 sonnets, published in 1609. My reply poems were all Shakespearean sonnets, 3 4-line stanzas and a 2-line wrap-up. I wanted to learn from my spiritual mentor how to write the kind of lyrics he liked in the form he loved the most. I don't grasp why this kind of thing isn't done more often. Actually, I didn't dare to say it when I wrote this, but I do think I understand why it isn't done more often. It isn't done more often because if you write 154 sonnets in reply to those of Shakespeare, what you're saying to the reader is, will you please compare me with Shakespeare? Not once, but 154 times. And not everybody wants to take this, to make this kind of a statement or suggestion, but I'm not shy. Be an apprentice then to your mentor and converse with him on the topics he prefers. The Norn in my last line, just trying to clear up all difficulties before they arise, represents the fates in Norse myth. In Norse myth you have the 3 Norns, like the 3 witches in Macbeth, or the 3 fates in Greek mythology, Clotho, Lachesis, and Atropos, the 3 fates. Clotho, she spins out the yarn of your life. Lachesis measures it. And Atropos, when it's time, goes snip. That's the way it works. As I learn more each day from William, in the sonnets he calls himself Will and makes a dozen jokes on the name, we both feel the sweet freedom that conquers fate. The Norns are the fates, Shakespeare drives them away. Here we go. Will I with you at eve and morn, and with perception grown more keen at midnight, thinking more serene and certain which the dawns adorn, conversed that words might come to mean a friendship depth high hope would warm, when from the dead a sonnet form strode resurrected on the scene. Sweet William, I with you pristine, in spite of all who glory scorn, have walked on mead and field in dream, and steed have ridden of the storm, wherein the lightnings white careen, whose freedom warns the fleeing Norn. You can see lots of harmonies, right? It's very musical. I hope, well, it puts me in a kind of trance, and if it does that for you, I have succeeded. Now let's try another one. I call this one Song. Everything I write is a song, but here I focus on it as a theme. The beings who gave me skill to wake the blood with music are the birds I mention in line 4, who are the models for all prophetic song. Why? Because in the dark they predict the sun's arising, which people can't yet see. I don't know how the birds do that. They can't see the sun, they always sing it, celebrate it as if they were singing praise to it before it comes. I call them prophets for that reason. They predict. They model the ancient Greek dithyramb and the modern anthem, both hymns of praise. And then I use some unusual words such as riant, which means laughing, and susurro, which means whisper. The bird as a fire-attuned creature made me, to the sun that is, made me think of William Blake's mythic people who also embody elemental power. Examples are Theotormon, the torment god, who is also a Thor-like storm, and Uthun, the very spirit of the wind sounding in her name. That's from William Blake's poem, Visions of the Daughters of Albion. I used to teach Blake's poetry, a whole semester course in it, for 35 years. I'm not easily tired of William Blake. I also thought of Blake's 2-page engraved poem, The Dream of Abel, where Cain the killer, about whom Lord Byron also wrote a play, comes to learn about forgiveness. How do elementally related creatures bring to mind, like Theotormon, the Thor-like storm, or Uthun the wind, or the bird as a prophet of the fiery sun? How do elementally related creatures bring to mind the theme of forgiving? In a movingly Buddhist-minded vision, Blake writes in Auguries of Innocence, the bleat, the bark, bellow and roar are waves that beat on heaven's shore. We are all elemental creatures, and in mutual empathy we must find pardon. Here's the poem. Who gave to me the skill to wake the arteries with artful tune, let's speak and spook in May and June, then whistle, chirrup, slur and shake, of dithyramb and anthem break the day to blithest being soon. In chant, while newly riant rune of leaves will sweet Cicero make. Bright tear of sordid angel Blake, storm Theotormon, doomed Uthun, Cain mercy lent for Byron's sake. What beast and bird might shriek and croon, their sun stream blazing on a lake, with purple, pink, and blue bestrewn. Oh, this next one is fun. Here I present a character I invented. He's the neg-nag. That is to say, nagging negativity. And this is my personal devil. The neg-nag is the nag of negativity. He never sees the good side of anything. You can relate him somewhat to Mephistopheles, the devil figure in Faust by J.W. von Goethe, Germany's #1 poet. Goethe called this champion naysayer the spirit that steadily denies. That's the neg-nag. Der Geist der stets verneint, if you like the German. Mephistopheles, though, is more than my neg-nag, more than a spirit of denial or negation. He also embodies skeptical intellect, which has a function in an integrated psyche, along with Faustian passion, homunculus intuition, and the eternal feminine's creative love. See, the characters in Faust stand for psychological forces, so Goethe is doing a certain amount of modern mind mapping. Goethe wants us to show that skeptical intellect has a valid part in a fourfold mental wholeness. Regrettably, though, most of the time Mephisto is willfully destructive and just plain mean. My neg-nag is more like the sullen in Dante's Inferno, people who hurt themselves more than others. These sulkers live partly or wholly submerged in a foul swamp, like the Slough of Despond in Bunyan's Pilgrim's Progress. The sullen are living in a rancid marsh that they chose by viewing the world as if through acrid smog. The non-stop negator will fashion his own hell. Sometimes when I'm sitting by myself in my rocker and I start feeling resentful of something, and I even give a little speech criticizing it, I stop myself and say, this is the neg-nag, stop. The neg-nag loves a monologue, and yet he cannot realize that talking merely to despise blots out the light with clammy fog. The sullen one, a muddy hog, in damp miasma shutting eyes, ought never deem a sulker wise for dwelling in despondence bog. More sanguine far the gulping frog, more light the flitting dragonflies, than he that faulty minds would flog. You're daily resurrected. Rise. Make vanish ugly bulking smog. That sounded like ugly duckling, didn't it? Be gone, bad spirit that denies. Little self-sermon there. A lot of my poems are self-therapy. Okay, now here are my thoughts about a poem called Answer. I'm a devoted chorister, having sung tenor with the Binghamton University Chorus for a dozen years. And at the time I wrote this, we were preparing the Brahms Requiem, a glorious masterpiece. So I love to go to vocal concerts, but in the program notes, the translations of song lyrics are underwhelming. They're not works of art, but word-for-word prose trots. Have you noticed this? Why read something ugly to help you get more from a performance filled with beauty? Instead of asking, what did the poet say? We should pose the question, what did the poet sing? Poetry is word music. That's what we troubadours think, and it is the principle by which I live. Poetry will speak only with melody that can move the trees, as did the Orphic hymns of ancient time. I close my poem by portraying the spirit of Italian sonnet master Petrarch, who earned laurels for honey-tongued lauds of lady friend Laura. I need to take a deep breath now and then. Some of my little mini lectures are a bit windy. What did the poet mean to say? He never meant or said a thing. His errand was a hymn to sing. Might not that be sufficient? Eh? My whole family comes from Canada. He's like a swimming fish at play, a bird to prophesy the king, cicada stridulator wing, or white wind whish for willow sway. O scholar, cry not, well a girl. Black-tasseled cap, aside I fling. No doctrine here we gather may. O blather, let us rather bring from ample valley fresh bouquet. Blessed Laura life be laureling. There's not a lot of gloom in my poems. Even chasing away the devil, I can't help making jokes. That's because that's my personality. I call it happy brain chemistry. This is a fun poem. I call it Quartet, and here are my preliminary thoughts. You need to know how it arose. My friend Lee Shepherd put on Facebook a photo of her charming cat Thomas lying comfortably inside her violin case while she played Beethoven quartets with her guests. Cats fit nicely inside a violin case. I had a cat. I had two of them, I can tell you. My poetic tribute is based on a little musical joke. Beethoven's last major work, the Quartet Opus 127, concludes with a movement titled The Difficult Decision, Der schwer gefasste Entschluss. The slow intro is headed Muss es sein, or Must it be? He wrote these things in the margins of the music. And the following rapider part provides the musical and spoken answer. Es muss sein. It must be. Maybe he's thinking about his deafness. We'll never know. He didn't tell us. In my 14er, I imagine the cat is uttering the answer. Es muss sein. It must be. Except that the muss sounds like meow to non-feline ears. I like to think of the cat mewing along with the music, although I'm not sure this ever happens with Thomas. My daughter Sarah's cat Nick, though, did join in when she and her husband Jeremy sang a Mongolian folk song duet during my visit to them in Minneapolis, and I learned that cat had a musical soul. I always liked cats, and now I love them even more. Here's my poem, Quartet. The cat of black and white that lies In fiddle case, O nap divine, were I to ask it, muss es sein? Might answer me with tranquil eyes, in quiet tone, es muss. The wise reply, made clear to ears like mine, mere mew might seem, with tone condign, to those who cat speech can't apprise. Late Ludwig brewed a vintage fine. Our feline friend can realize, if dimly, what a dervish wine can mean to one who skyward sighs. 'Twill mew to music and recline, and freedom feel in mind arise. I've noticed that in all my readings I tend to include at least one poem about cats. I wasn't raised with a dog, I'm sorry, but I never learned to love them properly. Oh, this is a lot of fun. This is thoughts on a poem called Water. And some unusual words that I use are antiphon, which means a chant in choral response, barbiton, which means a lute, and noumenon, which means a holy apparition or epiphany. Seeing and hearing as we apprehend the sacred is the theme of this lyric. To be surrounded in a lake or pool by a surface made of water and light that momently remorph their blending patterns can be a waking dream. I experienced that in a swimming pool when I was about 10 or 11. I never forgot it, the constantly changing colors in the water. I never was a swimmer, I just sat there and stared. Indescribable momentary changes of harmony and form in space recall the experience you have in playing or hearing music, a pliable, compliant, yet ungraspable world. Typing a poem, or even these more relaxed remarks, on a keyboard with a tent-like shape, the two detached halves joined at their central northern corners where we have a big knob to adjust the angle of the slope. Have you ever seen an ergonomic keyboard of this kind? The two squares joined with a knob at the top? No. This is the special thing that was prescribed for me by a doctor, Dr. Emile Pasquarelli, who was featured in an article in Smithsonian Magazine as the world authority on repetitive stress injuries that musicians suffer, and I'm a violinist. It cost me $500 a consultation, but I was videoed while playing the violin, and I learned I have a basically body-friendly technique. It was computers plus violin that were messing me up, and he cured me with mere exercises and no surgery, let me tell you. But this, to type on such a keyboard is just like letting your fingers glide over the water in summer. And the typing is equally remindful of music. I hear the clicking keys mark the notes I'm playing, while the fingers are constantly rushing about, sweeping over the keys. Winds move a string while touching the top swells of the lake waves. See, I couldn't wait to start writing poetry. Water. A sparkled, curving light upon a surface of a ray-warmed lake will net or web-like meshing make to alter if the wind move yon. The fingers playing on it shake what pattern will unraveled spawn more child wave gleams that eve and dawn life mirror while they softly quake. Your hands upon the keyboard wake the hues of tunes in antiphon that shape thirst will in liquid slake. I play the harp and barbiton who letters touch. Let sunlight break to say the water noumenon. You can't say it's tough. I explained it all at the beginning. And nicely, when you're reading the book, you can refer back to that as often as you like. Oh, this is a fun piece. Now this is a poem called Dozen, and by dozen is meant a dozen names for the eternal feminine. Have you ever heard the phrase, the eternal feminine draws us upward? It's the last line of Goethe's Faust. Faust, traditionally sold his soul to the devil. Well, Goethe, he had happy brain chemistry, something I just told you about. Happy brain chemistry, and he wanted a happy ending. So he worked for 60 years, and finally he came up with a way, I don't have to go into it here, I wrote a book about it called Blake and Goethe, a way to get Faust into heaven by some kind of psychological strategizing. And the heaven he gets into is not very traditional in some ways, but very much so in others. There's no hint of a Jesus saving anybody's soul. That's not there. And Goethe wasn't attached to the theme at all. Rather, what you have presiding over the entire ensemble is a variant of Raphael's portrait of the Virgin Mary. And Goethe compares her with the goddess Venus. They're both goddesses of love now, aren't they? In a way, so to speak. And it is the goddess of love and beauty and passion and delight and desire that welcomes Faust into this very female heaven. And so we get the last line of the poem after 60 years of work, which is Das ewig Weibliche zieht uns hinan, or as I would, the eternal feminine draws us upward is the usual translation, but I would rather say, feminine unending is hailing us higher. Get it? Feminine unending, that's the eternal feminine, is hailing us, H-A-L-E means to lift, higher. Feminine unending is hailing us higher. And in my thoughts, I write, here's a bouquet of 12 roses for the eternally feminine. 12 apparitions, ways in which she appears to us. The Queen of Sheba inspired the biblical King Solomon. Shula, my name for the unnamed Shulamite, was Solomon's lover. The Virgin Mary, in the poem I also associate her with the burgeoned berry. I just loved wordplay. Is also called Maris Stella, or Star of the Sea. She is the goddess of the sky and also of the earth. Sabbath Queen in Judaism is called Shekhinah in Hebrew, which means indwelling presence, God's female emanation. She unites with God on Sabbath Eve, which is why traditional Judaism recommends romancing one's wife on Sabbath Eve. It is the time the thing for which God himself sets the example with his female emanation. Houris are supernatural females in Quranic heaven. Euterpic is a word I use to mean cheerful, because Euterpe is the deity muse of comedy and lover's lyric verse. You know, there are 9 muses that in Greek mythology inspired the various arts. Love deity Venus, or Aphrodite, received the apple prize from Paris the Trojan. I use the word Parisian to refer to Paris the Trojan, but I also have in mind a more modern meaning for the word Parisian. I never stop with the word plays. And by the way, Aphrodite is important because she gave her name to the month of April. I only learned that just this last year, because it isn't obvious. April comes from a variant, an ancient variant of Aphrodite, but it's nice because March belongs to Mars, right? And he's the god of war, and in Binghamton we know very well how to associate Mars with war of the elements, but then he has to step aside to make way for April, which is the time for the goddess of beauty and love and passion, desire and delight. Then there's Canaanite Asherah, which is Babylonian Ishtar, which is Greek Astarte, and they are all the goddess of fertility. And then there's Artemis, Grecian huntress and goddess of the moon, and she relates to a trinity of deities: Lucina or Lucina, childbirth, Diana, moon, and Hecate, underworld and witchcraft. Did I give a sufficient tribute to the eternal feminine? I really showed it's not exactly Goethe's discovery. Dozen. You, Sheba, Shula, brave, serene, you, stellar Mary of the sea, who helped the burgeoned berry bee, You tranquil Sabbath angel queen, hand-henna'd houri whom I see, muse whirling in euterpic gleam, bright Venus of Parisian dream, Asherah Ishtar, Eden tree, heart's Artemis of lunar beam, Lucina, Dian, Hecate, O month named in our year esteem, that's Aphrodite, April, my 12 bouquet let welcomed be, with gift of all that would beseem a gentle woman, spirit free. Now my next poem, called Lauds, is based on Sufi thinking. The Sufis are mystics. Sufism has its roots in Islam, though Sufis try to think beyond Islam and beyond all religions. In medieval Persian verse, the nightingale is the soul, and the rose is the soul's awareness of God. You can hardly read a Sufi poem without finding, sooner or later, a nightingale singing to a rose, the soul seeking for God and seeing God. Nightingale and rose, the soul in its imagining of God, breathe the same longing, which they effuse in melody and aroma, in hymn and incense. For the medieval poet Ibn Arabi, one of the most profound of Sufi mystic thinkers, actually he wrote more prose than poetry. He writes theosophy, which is a kind of philosophy that doesn't start with doubt, I think, therefore I am. It starts with God. That's the difference in procedure. For medieval Ibn Arabi, most profound of Sufi mystic thinkers, bird and bloom express one identical longing. It is the longing of the first of all lovers, the lonely God, who in his melancholy solitude breathed forth by imaginative yearning a universe that could return his love. He didn't just breathe into Adam when Adam was fashioned of clay. He breathed in an infinite breath into the great nothing, and the universe, or pluriverse, arose, including us. God's love, God's originating breath, his loving breath, not only gave life to Adam's clay, it originated the cosmos and gave God something to love and ended his lover's melancholy for a while. God was and is King Solomon, the Quran, a divine love letter to his entire creation, his beloved Shulamith. When we sigh in longing for him, we return his longing for us and for our love. When we return his longing and his love, we fulfill his wish and expand his being. We add fullness to the being of the Lord himself. That's a remarkable thing to read, isn't it? The dawn gates lift up their heads in praise, as they do in Psalm 24. And then finally I quote a couple of Latin words. Oro means I pray, and orior means I rise. They both appear in the motto of the Jesuit order. I pray, I rise, because they sound almost the same. It means that when you pray, you rise. The two Latin words have kindred meaning. Oh, that's rather a lot of intro, isn't it? But I wanted to provide it for the poem that's representative of a very rich tradition of imaginative thought. Here's the poem Lauds, which means praises. If nightingale that hymned the rose be soul of one awaiting Lord made new aware, the tune reward is that his name be heard, he knows. Of bloom and bird the firm accord will mean that in their giving flows what in the primal wind breath blows, which as we woke had life restored. I pray it be my fate when shows the morning heaven strength outpoured, the blue gold lines to pen where glows a dawn whose ruddy gates adored, proclaim the ruling heart of those who are the Orior. Now the next poem is one of the very first four-liners that I ever wrote. It's called Socrates. And what fascinates me in this poem is the two-sidedness of Socrates. You know of him as an ethical rationalist. He said, know yourself. That was his motto, which he learned from the oracle at Delphi. Know yourself, and he was always asking, why do I do this? And asking the youth of Athens, whom we met on the street, where are you going, and why are you planning to do this, and what do you expect to get out of it? He was always asking why, and eventually that got him into trouble if you asked too many questions. You're probably aware that he was condemned to death for corrupting the youth of Athens. Well, so Socrates was a rationalist. He may have invented philosophic ethics as a systematic discipline. But on top of that, and in contrast to it, he had a guardian spirit called a daimon, in Latin it's spelled D-A-E-M-O-N, which was pronounced by the Romans daimon, but today it's pronounced demon. That's where we get our word demon. But the demon for Socrates was not an evil spirit, more like a guardian spirit. That fascinates me, and that's what I wrote about. The Greek word daimon meant a spirit, not what we'd call today a demon. I'm using the Latin spelling D-A-E-M-O-N, usually pronounced just like demon, partly because I want to keep thinking about its archaic hidden power. The lyric was one of the first thin 14ers I wrote over a decade ago, and it matters to me in a major way because I personally need guidance of exactly the kind that helped Socrates. As stated in stanzas 3 and 4, if all minds are imperfect in our world below the stars, to attain any wisdom at all would be, that is, I say were, meaning would be, harder than we thought. We need what's felt as a vatic or prophetic guide within. You remember Socrates said he knew nothing, but he thought his wisdom was that he was the only guy around who knew that he knew nothing. But my personal problem, and here I'm imagining it shared by the Greek philosopher, is an impulsive nature. I work fast. I do things quickly. So the demon I need is one that will slow me down and make me give decisions more thought. A person who's labile or volatile needs to make haste slowly. Have you ever heard that phrase? Make haste slowly? It was a favorite motto of Erasmus in the Middle Ages. He used to say it in Latin, festina lente. My father, who taught philosophy as his profession, used to love that motto, and he would often quote, he'd say, make haste slowly. Here's Socrates, and of course, although I call the poem Socrates, what I really care about is how that demon of his operated. Socrates had a demon. Oh, the godly gift. It whispered, no, whenever he'd the best deter. The Vatic voice might well prefer a sager haste, be late and slow. It matters not how fast you go. All minds imperfect here below, attaining any wisdom were much harder than we thought. The foe may overreach, we come to know. The labiles lamed far oftener by sharpened blade, impatient spur. We need a rest that we may grow. Repose before the morning glow. Okay, we had Socrates. We're on the theme of Greek philosophy. I like philosophy, and I had extremely good professor for Intro to Philo, and I really still remember him. So this is a little poem I wrote about Aristotle, who's a great favorite of mine. Socrates asked more questions than he answered, but Aristotle did have a coherent program of thought, which I would call self-realization ethics, and I'll explain about that. I can still hear the kind, gentle voice of Professor Reginald Allen, my teacher in Introduction to Philosophy, who was a classicist too. He explained to us that Aristotle's father was a doctor, and the boy would grow up to be a thinker who favored metaphors and ideals based on the image of a healthy organism. In his Nicomachean Ethics, Aristotle taught that each organism's enterechia, or growth principle, is the guide to its ultimate good. It's self-realization or self-actualizing by developing in a healthy way the potentials of its nature. He may be called the original and may be still the chief theorist of self-realization ethics. In other words, you have a growth principle, as a tree does. And that's why his favorite saying, it's in this last part of the paragraph, but I'm in such a hurry to tell you that I'll just go ahead and say it now. The acorn loves to become the oak. There's Aristotle's ethics in one sentence. Become who you are. Become what the growth principle in you wants to become. Because that's what you are. What I'm hearing Professor Allen repeat to me now is Aristotle's metaphor guide to the good life. The acorn loves to become the oak. Listen to your growth principle means be true to your nature. Become who you are. Let your mind be as balanced as your body is beautifully symmetric. Allow your thinking to circulate as freely as your blood and breath. And this introduces a sub-theme. I would call it the classical quality of Aristotle's ethics. Because if you want to unfold and become what you have the power to be, according to your growth principle, you have to grow as the acorn does into an oak, a balanced tree, right? The branches go out on both sides. They're not all crammed onto one side. There should be no such thing, Aristotle says, as behavior characterized either by excess or deficiency. The best for when you're considering each quality of your nature is to find a golden mean, the right thing in between. That's classical ethics. I think of it as symmetrical balance, the one thing against the other, the excess against the deficiency, and arrive at the golden mean as that central trunk of the tree with branches on both sides. And I think of that as very like an ancient Greek temple. Balance, right? Symmetry, harmony of the columns, everything is perfectly in place. Or for that matter, the Greek sculptures of the human body, which was to them the perfect model of balance. An acorn loves becoming oak, so Aristotle wise defined the way our life might be entwined with perfect goal. You each, good folk, have an entelechy designed, a principle of growth, to yoke your striving, realizing, stoke its energy, and you've combined the self and selfless. Who's the bloke that wouldn't like it? We've aligned the forces that the both awoke. Just live your whole potential. Joke. The undermined, they've undermined, who won't apply our genius stroke. Now, in contrast with that, classical ethics of balance and symmetry, there's another approach to ethics which I would call the romantic. This is like Lord Byron's crazy wild life. He tested out every form of experience to see how far he could go with it. That's very much the way scientists behave with their theories, right? And you experiment to see how far your theory will carry you before it starts not applying anymore. Test out each experience to the limit. William Blake put that very well in his proverb of hell, as he called it, balancing the conservative book of Proverbs in the Bible with a more romantic, intensity-oriented Proverbs of hell. He said, you never know what's enough until you know what's more than enough. That's a slightly dangerous guide, because you can get in deep trouble that way. But at the same time, how do you know what the balance should be unless you know how far you can go also? The tree has to grow high as well as being balanced sideways, right? I think you should combine the two. I am very fond of classical ethics and romantic ethics, and that's the ethics of balance and the ethics of intensity. Intensity is an ideal in itself. And my friend sent me a poem by Fez, who's a popular Pakistani poet, that says this. He says, this is what said poet Fez: world sadness pile on sadness when you're moaning for your friend. Wine blent with wine, the more will heart entice and mind beguile. In other words, when you're sad, get sadder. When you're drinking wine to drown your sadness, drink some more. Very much an ethic of intensity. And I'll just go on with my poem. Our plaintive tears will not deplore, we're meant to feel. Why not in style move styleless reed, in lyric while we chant with art emotions war. With wilder force we'll hike our mile. With wilder force we'll hike our mile. Our woe is Eden's apple core, receding grief, a seedling smile. Mulled cider may the mind restore, us joyful, mild, no royal can rile. The lure of tune is roar made lore. You know what happened there? Fez gave way to me with happy brain chemistry. I'm talking about calming down after the intensity and taking a bit of something mild, not wine, but just ordinary mulled cider. And actually, you know, the romantics themselves, the poets, Blake, my special focus of interest, tried to balance out intensity ethic with balance ethic. So Blake did write Proverbs of Hell, but then he incorporated them into a larger manifesto book called The Marriage of Heaven and Hell, which turns out to be the marriage of order and energy, the key to a balanced mind. Okay, so don't want to oversimplify anything. Now let's try. My thoughts on falling, the metaphor of falling. I devote this rumination to the imagery of descent. The Mary legend is told in the Quranic chapter or surah devoted to her. She doesn't give birth in a manger but under a palm tree. And she says that her labor pangs are so bad, she wished she'd never been born. Isn't that amazing for Virgin Mary to say things like that? She does in the Quran. So what happens is God lowers the date palm tree so she can grab some dates, and then makes a stream flow right beside her so she can drink something, and then we hope she feels better. Oh, she never commented on that. Dew is regarded as a mercy in Persian verse. I call myself the Clown Prince to indicate in a joking way how grateful I am as poet to be recipient of showers of golden light. I'm just picking up on the jocular mood Heinrich Heine aroused when, with characteristic wit, he spoke of the shower of gold by which Zeus impregnated Danae as taking the form of Golddukaten, minted coins of gold. For Christians, the descent of Jesus meant the rise of the saved. From this grew a desire to see the Hebrew Bible as prefiguring the fall, which would be a rise. To take one example, the abandonment of Joseph in a well was followed after his rescue and conveyance to Egypt by promotion to the role of compassionate, powerful helper, second in stature to Pharaoh. Thomas Mann's 4-volume novel Joseph and His Brothers highlights the fall that became an ascent. And I conclude with that little flash essay with one of my favorite quotes from the Psalms of David. The stone which the builders refused is become the headstone of the corner. This is the Lord's doing. It is marvelous in our eyes. Falling. When Buddha touched the earth, came down upon him sky blooms. When below the palm tree Mary wept in woe, she merited a martyr's crown. For grievous labor pangs that so great pain inflicted, heaven's frown? She wondered. Dates, though, plump and brown, fell in her lap, that heart might glow. When Persians viewed the herbal gown of nature green, that dew would show of jewels, how they sang. The clown prince may through floor abundance go, in bliss, who knows, in Vestal town, gold, Danae, and ducat flow. And I have a concluding poem. Fittingly, it's called October. That's because, although I was born in April, the month of Aphrodite, I feel more energetic in September. And I love the trees that we have in our area, which are utterly astonishing, aren't they? I mean, autumn exhilarates. I never liked the maxim, age gracefully. Better, age flamboyantly. A flambeau is a torch. As the leaves in final glory flame, so too may we. The poet Mevlana Jalaluddin Rumi, who wrote in Persian though he lived in Turkey, revolutionized Islamic attitudes to fire. In the Quran it's linked to torment, but in Rumi it becomes allied to dance. The entire cosmos he likens to one huge dancing fire, and humans are dancing atoms, each one a mote in a sunbeam. In Persian poetry, wine, an emblem of ardor, of passionate love divine and human, may be viewed as processed fire. Poet Hafiz likens Noah's wine flask to the ark as a sure means of keeping the mind alive during flood threat time. According to poet Hafiz, Noah kept his ark in his pocket. That was the flask of wine. That's what saved you from chaos and the darkness and destruction. Sufi philosopher Ibn Arabi thought life needed to be tasted before it could be understood. Drinking and dancing are ways of tasting life. Experience them, and you can try, if you want, to write about them later. So here's my poem, October, and it has a lot to say about my personality and my dissatisfaction with entire reliance on the ethics of balance and my not so secret inclination to that of testing out each experience to the limit. Ray-brushed boughs by dream warmth skimmed, orange amber, pain assuage, left on vivid gilded page, arbor edge on cloud bank limbed. Heaven will a bonfire stage, yellow, addled, overbrimmed, shows how clustered cones encage darkly, sharp the outline rimmed. Symbol this of senior age, fiery proud desire I've hymned, shines serene of mind-free mage, arms upraising, vision vimmed, nothing knowing, holy sage, boundless beating glow undimmed. Thank you.